Furious, standing behind Andrea on the steps of that house as she stood down.
I assure her of my full support.
Hear, hear.
Thank you very much.
Because I knew that we were in a position where someone who didn't really in their heart and soul believe in it was going to be leading the country.
Boris, you feel betrayed?
Pro-Brexit candidates had fallen away,
I'm naturally disappointed.
leaving Theresa May with the top job but no real plan.
There was no evidence that anyone had done half an hour's thinking about what happens if the referendum votes no and Britain then has to Brexit. All of it had to be done on blank sheets of paper.
Brexit means Brexit. I want to ensure that we get a red, white and blue Brexit.
At her first conference as leader, aides sensed politics. Winning over Leave voters was very much driving the strategy.
They find your patriotism distasteful, your concerns about immigration parochial.
I think there's certainly true, looking back, that the early statements raised expectations and built on a Leave campaign that had done similar things.
Against the advice of some senior officials, she announced a date for Article 50, the letter kicking off time-limited negotiations.
We will invoke Article 50 no later than the end of March next year.
Politics was red hot. People were urging, people look back now and say, oh, you triggered Article 50, too quickly, you shouldn't have done it at that time. Well, at that point, if you tried to hold it back any further, you'd have been absolutely crucified.
Some Brexiteers worried Brexit wouldn't happen if the letter didn't go in. The papers joined in her fight in the courts against Parliament getting a role in triggering Article 50. The tone was still shrill, and Theresa May was still trying to knock on individual EU leaders' doors, as one key negotiator recalls.
I think that for a long time, for a number of months, the British considered that ultimately the 27 will choose their national and economic interests over the ground principles of the European Union.
But in a speech at Lancaster House at the beginning of last year, Theresa May showed something substantial was changing in her approach.
Whether that means we must reach a completely new customs agreement, become an associate member of the customs union in some way, or remain a signatory to some elements of it, I hold no preconceived position.
The language about the customs union in Lancaster House speech is far, far more nuanced than people now give it credit for. And it didn't explicitly say we will be coming out of the customs union.
Old allies of Theresa May, like her then deputy, suggest this was the moment the plan shifted.
That was the moment when the policy and the politics came together, and that was the text from which everything was meant to flow. That was the big speech.
From the moment the Article 50 letter was handed over, a 2-year deadline kicked in.
So here it is, 6 pages. The clock is ticking.
Some British politicians, I think it was a position expressed by Mr. Davis himself, thought that 1 year was absolutely sufficient to negotiate the withdrawal agreement and the agreement on the status for the future of UK. This was a very poor analysis.
The European Commission's negotiating stance has hardened. Threats against Britain have been issued by European politicians and officials. All of these acts have been deliberately timed to affect the result of the general election.
Theresa May deliberately struck a strident anti-EU tone in the snap election, she called. A tabloid backing group joined in. It got many pro-Brexit voters on side, but it drove away many pro-Remain ones.
Until that point, actually, I think she sort of managed to walk the sort of the wire quite well in terms of keeping people on side. But I think that was one of the key moments when suddenly she became a divisive Brexiteer as opposed to a Prime Minister trying to bring the country together.
To be honest, I'm concerned. Time passes quickly.
A soft focus EU video explains how much of the talks was about citizens' rights, Britain paying up for spending committed to while a member. But as the clock ticked, Britain, in a hurry, accepted Michel Barnier's insistence But there must be a pledge in treaty law that there will be no hard border between Ireland and Northern Ireland. It would be one of the most decisive moments in the talks. Just after the election, Theresa May made the self-proclaimed rebel commander of the European Research Group pro-Brexit MPs a minister.
I'm probably not the most risk-averse member of Parliament, but that's
He now
really
thinks he
there.
was camouflaged for a soft Brexit, and that the Irish backstop was a means to make sure Britain hugged Europe close. This is something being planted in the Article 50 work, which bleeds into the future relationship and somehow now seems to have smothered and entangled it. Was it a plot?
I don't think we can know whether there was a plot, as it were, until we've got access to the archives in, whatever, 20, 30 years.
But you've got a nagging suspicion.
That there is a nagging suspicion amongst all of us that the Irish border issue has been tremendously overinflated in order to justify a high-alignment Brexit.
Theresa May stands alone outside the EU summit meeting room in Salzburg. Soon after the setbacks here, though, she got the EU to flip round and allow her the UK-wide customs arrangement Michel Barnier had said she couldn't have.
And the UK wants to use Ireland as a kind of test case for the future EU-UK custom relations. This will not happen. We agreed to create a EU-UK single customs territory.
Maybe time pressures had got to them too. A deal was struck, with the direction of travel as close to Europe's institutions as ending freedom of movement would allow.
The British people want this to be settled.
Aide says she always wanted the closest deal possible that ended freedom of movement.
Thank you very much.
Far cry from some election rhetoric, a hard sell to some in her own party, who now feel she probably always had it in for them and their approach.
Perhaps if Theresa May had had a majority of 100 or more, I think perhaps she would have sought to crush the ERG and crush those ideas.
We might have got to where we are now even quicker.
Well, we might have done, yeah, it's conceivable.
I certainly wouldn't use words like crush them, but it was about getting some flexibility, because Brexit is divisive. It's divisive in the party, it's divisive in the country.
She could have outvoted
them. So you needed
them.
some flexibility. Now, what to use it for? Well, that depends how the negotiation goes.
But it was to get
the
round
flexibility was the key thing.
It was to get round the hardcore like him.
Well, I think it was to definitely make sure there was a plurality of voices in the party.
It's not quite how it was sold at the time.
It's not how it was sold at the time, but then I might not have sold it in the way it was.
The clock now ticks to the Commons' vote on the Great Compromise.
There were fans of Norway, there were fans of Canada, there were fans of No Deal, and we ended up with 700,000 people marching saying, please can we start again? So this was at least a four-sided contest. And funnily enough, the Prime Minister has ended up somewhere in the middle, which is probably a sensible, pragmatic place for a Prime Minister to be.
It is traditionally where politicians strike gold, but Europe stirs potent forces in politics, and these are strange times.